With COVID-19 dominating the headlines, immigration and border security have all but disappeared from the national discussion. While America's attention might be turned elsewhere, issues at America's southern border persist and have the potential to explode under a Biden administration. Tonight we'll take a look at the continued struggle to secure America's border on this special edition of Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. Around this time 4 years ago, President-elect Donald Trump was preparing to move into the White House after his upset victory over former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Arguably, the issue that most directly contributed to his win was immigration, border security. If elected, Trump promised to build a wall with Mexico, end controversial policies like catch and release, and punish so-called sanctuary cities that failed to cooperate with law enforcement. Fast forward to today, and the issue of border security is barely spoken of. The outbreak of COVID-19 effectively pushed the issue off the table, a stroke of luck for Democrats, many of whom hold positions that are wildly out of touch and actually unpopular with the American people, at least when they can find out about it. We can all remember during the second Democratic debate, for example, when asked if their health care plans would cover illegal immigrants, every single Democrat candidate on stage that night raised their hands. That includes the man who is taking over in the next administration, Joe Biden. Biden has sold himself as a moderate on most issues, including immigration, but his election will result in reversals of key border security policies put in place by the Trump administration. Let's remember this. It was immigration that separated Donald Trump initially from the rest of the Republican pack in that 2016 primary. It was Donald Trump's willingness to go right into the teeth of the media with stories, with anecdotes, with telling people facts that they had not heard before about what's going on at the border. What does illegal immigration actually mean? What does it mean for American workers? Why does this continue? Why is the lawlessness something that we are told we all have to accept? Trump said no, and he came in with a different approach. Now, Joe Biden has already said, for example, he will stop border wall construction. This is a debate that we had as a country, and it was fascinating if you remember how this played out. The wall, which was chanted at Trump rallies constantly, build the wall, that was really the rallying cry of 2016, that alongside with Make America Great Again. And then the left told us walls don't work. This was fascinating. This was their actual position, as if we haven't seen walls work stretching back for centuries. I mean, you can go back to the Great Wall of China, go back to Hadrian's Wall, go back to any number of barriers meant to provide additional security between nation states of one kind or another. And we all know that walls work. And in fact, my time on our southern border covering this issue, speaking to, meeting with Border Patrol, talking to CBP, and watching as illegal aliens were caught because they tried to get over or around fencing, proved beyond any doubt that yes, a wall is a useful tool. It's not the only tool, it's not a panacea, but it's a useful tool in border security. So why would Biden want to get rid of it? Well, we all know why. The Democrat plan here, and they will enact this again starting in this year, and they'll do this as long as they can get away with it. The Democrat plan is to pretend that they support the rule of law, but then do everything possible to make sure that there is lawlessness at our southern border. There will be no change in that. This is because they feel that it benefits them politically. So yes, he'll get rid of building a wall. In fact, they may even decide that they'll go in reverse, make it easier for people to get across the border in some of these walled areas. And why? Well, because ultimately we understand that there will be amnesty attached to all of this. That's right. That is the word that you should have in mind going into 2021. Amnesty for illegal aliens, which is the proper term in federal law for people who are in the United States illegally. It's not dreamers, it's not undocumented, it is in fact illegal alien. Now, if the federal government wants to change the terms in the federal criminal code, that's up to them. But in the meantime, I don't think that we should cave to the mainstream media that has been so dishonest in their coverage of the immigration issue stretching back for decades now. I don't think we should use the words they tell us are approved especially when they go against what we actually know is the legal and therefore proper term. You have millions of illegal aliens in the United States right now. And you have an incoming administration that recognizes what has happened in a state like California. California was a country that was reasonably conservative until about the 1990s. It went for Ronald Reagan. In fact, famously, Ronald Reagan was governor of California. He came from that state. Now it is as blue as it gets. It is a socialist dystopia. And what really happened there? Sure, there are a lot of left-wingers in San Francisco, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, Hollywood. But if you really look at the demographic change, what happened in California is a massive influx of illegal aliens to the point where the political center of gravity became such that you had to be pro-illegal alien in California. Not pro-immigrant, not pro-legal immigrant. There's a difference. Pro-illegal alien, illegal immigrants in the United States. So much so that the state of California makes it harder for people in the federal government to enforce immigration laws. You don't often hear about this in the media. It's true. They don't want local or state law enforcement giving any assistance whatsoever to federal authorities. Why would they do such a thing? Look at what's happened in California. When you allow in millions of illegal aliens, they have family, they have kinship, they have children here, and guess what? That leads to more votes for Democrats. Not entirely, but more votes for Democrats. Reliably enough, the Democrat Party views this as an essential issue for them going forward. If they have 11 million, and many think, and I think the number is substantially higher than that, but if they have 11 million immigrants in the country, which is roughly the official number, it's the best guess that we have right now, if you get full-scale amnesty for that, the Republican Party will not win another national election for president, certainly, for years, perhaps decades to come. Amnesty, therefore, becomes the one issue that gives the Democrat a win on all the other issues. If we lose on amnesty, we'll lose on so much more. You think that we'll be able to have a conversation, a worthwhile back and forth over the size of government, taxation, socialism, government spending, climate change? You think we can win as conservatives on any of those issues if you have millions of new Democrat voters? I know what they'll say, and this will be part of the amnesty pitch. Oh, they won't be able to vote. Maybe not in the first round of amnesty legislation. How long do you think that will last? And even if they're not able to vote, if they stay here permanently, then they become fixed in their communities, and they will do everything they can. Many people who get amnesty from a Biden administration will owe their status to the Democrat Party. That will create a political effect that will be impossible for Republicans to overcome. Look at the margins in this last election. Even 2 or 3 million new Latino voters for the next election in key states, places like Arizona, places like Georgia. That will be a difference maker, and the Democrats know it. So this issue ties into all the rest. What was unfinished from the Biden administration? What was the one area? They got Obamacare, and they tried some climate change stuff. Wasn't really successful. But the place where they completely fell flat on their faces was on comprehensive immigration reform, which is just a fancy way of saying amnesty. Because the amnesty is for certain. All those benefits and all those checks and balances, all those things on the pathway that they say that have to be met first. You have to learn to speak English at a certain level. You have to pay back taxes. All these things, that never is enforced. Go back and look at the Reagan amnesty in 1986, where even Reagan himself said that, yeah, he was fooled because you had millions of people given status, and the rules that were agreed to about enforcement to get that status brushed aside. People get to stay. What do you think the game plan is for Democrats this time around? This allows them to change the American electorate. If Biden gets amnesty through, he will be a hero to the Democrat Party for decades to come, but he'll also make sure the Democrats have effectively an unending majority. They'll be able to get whatever else they want on all other. So if you're a Second Amendment person, if you're somebody that believes in limited government, if you're worried about the debt, all these issues, guess what? If they get amnesty, the Democrat Party is going to call the shots on all of it. All right, coming up on this special edition of Hold the Line, we've got a great lineup of guests ready to take a deep dive into this immigration issue. After the break, we'll talk to the Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies, Mark Krikorian, about the potential consequences of a Joe Biden presidency on border security. During the presidential campaign, President-elect Joe Biden promised to reverse Trump's immigration and border policies. His campaign site's immigration page says he'll, quote, take urgent action to undo Trump's damage and reclaim America's values, to modernize America's immigration system, and reassert America's commitment to asylum seekers and refugees. More specifically, Biden has said he'll stop construction of the border wall, reinstate DACA, boost the number of refugees, make it easier for migrants to claim asylum, and end Trump's Remain in Mexico program. But yesterday, top Biden advisors said they will not immediately roll back asylum restrictions at the Mexico border and other restrictive Trump policies. They've walked back Biden's campaign promises for day one changes. So what's going on here? Why the change of heart? Here to discuss is Mark Krikorian, Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies. Mark, great to see you. We like the beard.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with where we are right now. What did Trump manage from the Trump agenda, and what remains unfinished, and now the Biden team taking over could take quite a different direction?
Well, there's a lot that remains unfinished. That's a whole half-hour show. But the things that Trump actually accomplished, whose rollback by Biden is going to have real consequences, I would say the chief one is what you referred to, the Remain in Mexico program. And that, if you don't know what it is, it sounds like, okay, we'll stay in Mexico. But that's not what it is. It's a way of managing a flow of people from outside Mexico, Central America especially, who traveled through Mexico, came to our border, and then said the magic words of claiming asylum. They're coached by smugglers on what to say. And what happened before this Remain in Mexico program was that if you stepped across the border, said the magic words of asylum, you got a piece of paper and were let go into the United States, which getting into the U.S. and getting past the Border Patrol was the whole point of being smuggled in. So basically, illegal immigrants got what they wanted. They may show up for a hearing for asylum, they may not. It really didn't matter, because whatever happened, they weren't going to be made to leave. What Trump did, and I did not think he would succeed in getting Mexico to agree to this, is Mexico agreed to take people back to wait in Mexico for their hearing dates. So they didn't get to move to their relatives, get an illegal dishwashing job, and then disappear. They had to wait in Tijuana or Juarez or wherever it was until their hearing date came up, and then they would be able to illegally cross in, go to the immigration court, have their hearing. That took away the incentive to come up here and make a bogus asylum claim.
Do we know how much did it drop off after that? Because that's one way of proving, just anecdotally, but pretty clearly, whether these were legitimate asylum claims or not. I mean, do we have some sense of the drop off?
Yeah, enormous. I mean, like 80-90% decline right away in the numbers from before and after. There's still people waiting in Mexico because they figure they went to all that trouble, they spent the money, they might as well see it through. Although even there, a lot of those people are going back. They're giving up. They're saying, okay, well, this gambit didn't work. I'm just going to head back. And what it means is new people aren't coming. Some are still coming, but not nearly in the numbers. Because you know what was happening before this? Smugglers would bring busloads of people, not just single men, especially there were families. And they would find a place on the border, pretty remote areas, where there was just some kind of vehicle barrier. In other words, it's not anything that would stop you or me or even your grandma. It was just something to keep a truck from driving straight across the border. I've seen some of these places, and they would drive a busload of these people. It was cheap because once they got to the border, they were on their own. The smuggler didn't have to do anything for them, so they charged less. They hop over the little fence or scoot under it, and then they flagged down the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol was spending time.
I saw this happen. I actually saw surrenders in real time, large numbers of people, families in particular, women with small children, who would cross the border on foot illegally. They'd drive right up to it, and they'd walk over, and they would actually signal the Border Patrol And then they would want to know when they were going to be fed, and I mean they knew the whole process. They knew exactly what to say and what was going to happen next. So they weren't trying to evade; they were actually flagging down law enforcement as though they were some kind of a concierge service. But I do want to ask you about the crisis that seems to be brewing right now. We've already seen some changes in the numbers at the border. There are caravans coming up from Central America. We'll be talking about that more today on the program. What do you think is going to happen over the next 4 years? After 4 years of a declining rate, what goes on now?
Well, the numbers are, like you said, already starting to go up, and that's precisely because of the election. In other words, the smugglers are telling the migrants, Biden's in, so he's going to let you all in. And in fact, I sent a reporter down to southern Mexico at the beginning of the year before all this virus business started. And he was talking to Central Americans in Mexico, and they openly told him they were just waiting for Trump to lose, and they knew the Democrats were going to let them in. Now, the Biden officials just this week in an interview said, well, like you had said earlier in this segment, they're going to slow walk some of these changes. It's not all going to happen at once. Of course not. I predicted this last week. I basically scripted for them what they were going to say, because they know that they have a real likelihood of setting off a crisis at the border, and they're kind of keeping their fingers crossed, hoping that there's some way to avoid it. I don't think there is. This is going to get pretty bad, and I think it's going to get really bad just when the midterm election campaign starts, which is the Democrats' nightmare scenario. So in a sense, worse is better here as far as for the Republicans.
So tell me this, there's a readout of Biden's call with President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, AMLO, much easier to say the acronym, where Biden promised a new orderly and humane approach to migration. What do you think that means? How does that translate into policy?
What that means is no more Remain in Mexico program. It means it's going to be a lot easier for people to get asylum, because they're going to give asylum to people who have no basis for it under law. So people who, they live in a high crime neighborhood. Well, that doesn't get you asylum if you live in Detroit, and it shouldn't be getting you asylum if you're a Central American, but they're going to start doing that. But also it means they're going to come up with all kinds of ways of legally letting people into the country, more people. They're going to come up with extra, guest worker programs. They're going to come up with a refugee program, so they fly people straight from Central America into the U.S. so that we pay the smuggling costs, not the illegal immigrants themselves. They're going to come up with all kinds of ways of increasing the numbers, but also trying to hide that increase as much as possible. And the legacy media is going to help them. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, well, maybe not the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times and the Washington Post are going to do everything they can to basically tell the public, nothing to see here, move along, don't worry about it.
What is the best, before I let you go, Mark, what is the best estimate as of right now in the United States, according to CIS, Center for Immigration Studies numbers? What is the best estimate for how many illegal aliens are in the country?
People disagree, but I got to say the 11 million-ish estimate, 10 to 12 million, nobody really knows. I think that's actually sound, because there's always people who stop being illegal every year, as well as new people coming in. If there were 20 million illegal immigrants, we would see it in the death rates, the birth rates, school enrollment. We'd see it in all kinds of things. I just don't think that we're missing 10 million, 15 million extra illegal immigrants. I'd say 10 to 12 million is probably a good estimate. And really, how many do you need? Isn't that enough? Isn't that too many as it is?
Well, Mark, we'll see how it happens this coming year. We appreciate you joining us, and you're going to have your hands full, so thanks so much.
It's going to keep us busy. Thank you.
A new migrant caravan from Honduras has begun its trek north to the U.S.-Mexico border, indicating that a migrant surge may have already begun. More on that with the Heritage Foundation's Anna Rosa Quintana when we come back. Is another wave of illegal migrant caravans on the way to our borders, and is it going to hit right in 2021? Almost seemed for a while that the infamous caravans had disappeared. Drug smuggling and human trafficking had slowed at the border, and children were no longer being sent unaccompanied in large numbers into the United States. This was clearly an achievement of the Trump administration's stances on the border and illegal migration in general. But is the possibility of an impending Biden administration going to change all that? Will the migrant caravans make a return under a more lax Biden administration? Joining me now is Senior Policy Analyst for Latin America and the Western Hemisphere at the Heritage Foundation, Anna Rosa Quintana. Anna, great to have you on. And the name is fun to say. I appreciate it.
I know. Thanks for having me. Thanks for pronouncing my name correctly.
I tried. So tell me this. We've already seen reports about Central American caravans. Before I get to the caravan specifically, they fell out of the headlines. I know the numbers are way down, but what was the result? You know, there was this surge back in 2018, let's say. There was this big surge, caravans showing up at the border. I saw some of the caravans arriving at the border. And then the Trump administration had the Remain in Mexico policy, but that was for Central American migrants. What happened with, or predominantly Central American migrants, what happened with Central America in the interim with regards to U.S. immigration policy?
Sure. So we saw a significant uptick in the Central American caravans, right? Kind of like, and it just coincided with the U.S. midterm elections in 2018, like you said. You know, I and like a few other of my colleagues, we actually went to Mexico to see some of the caravan issue. And a lot of this was politically motivated. You know, you saw like a lot of like these leftist groups that organized this because they wanted to tie this to the U.S. election. So then you saw the implementation of MPP and various other regional migration agreements to limit as to where individuals from Central America could file for asylum, because many of them would come to the United States and file for meritless asylum claims, right? Fast forward to today. You now have the impending Biden administration and the impression that's being given off in Central America because of Biden's own statements and because of Democrats' own immigration policies is one of mass asylum. So obviously, we're going to see a significant uptick at the border. I mean, that's just the natural consequence of a promise of mass amnesty.
Now, how is the security situation going in Honduras, in Guatemala, in some of these Central American nations that have had so many people coming north? They usually claim that they face violence in their home country, and there are high per capita murder rates in those countries. Has that been addressed at all in recent years, or are they still very violent, particularly because of all the drug gangs, MS-13 and others operating there?
So right now, it's kind of like this perfect storm situation that's happening in Central America that can really be a horrible impetus for a massive uptick of migration, right? So you have a significant economic downturn because of the COVID lockdowns. You have really broad discontent with the governments, particularly in Guatemala and in Honduras. And then you also have pretty widespread devastation following two really bad hurricanes that recently occurred, right? So you have literally hundreds of thousands of people who have been displaced because of these hurricanes. And frankly, their governments are just not responding adequately because the governments, one, lack the capability, two, lack the political will, and three, there have been just such significant amounts of corruption over these last few years where the governments have essentially embezzled millions of dollars from their welfare funds that they just don't have the funds to respond. And they just know that the international community is going to come in, they're going to provide foreign assistance. But typically, a lot of the foreign assistance that would have been provided has gone towards pandemic-related costs, right? And then you also have the coyotes who are capitalizing on this, and they're also saying, hey guys, you know, the conditions in your countries are bad, and here comes Biden and here comes the Democrats, because there's going to be a complete revamping of U.S. immigration policy.
Have we seen any of that chatter either on the internet or just popping up in places? I mean, I remember during the surge in 2018, it was very clear that the word was out online. People were posting in chat groups. There were flyers they were handing out telling people that, you know, this is what you have to say if you get to the border. The coyotes were instructing people in what they would need to tell Border Patrol, at least to get into that first phase of claiming amnesty and then being able to stay in the country from there. We know there are some caravans on the move. What can you tell us about how mobilized are they, and what are your expectations in 2021 for how many we should be expecting?
I mean, you don't see the same level of mobilization that you saw back in 2018, right? I mean, in 2018, there was these massive infrastructure networks of just like moving people from country to country, from city to city. And I mean, we saw it with our own eyes, right? We would talk to some of these like caravan leaders, and they would say, well, we would call one city to the next city and tell them that we're arriving with 5,000 people, find us a stadium, a facility, whatever, get us food, get us, healthcare supplies, get us whatever. They would essentially like extort the local government officials, and that would be provided for them within the next 2-3 days. That's not really happening right now because the lockdowns are still in place, right? So one of these caravans that tried to move forward about a few weeks ago, the Guatemalans stopped them because Guatemala is still in lockdown, and they have a pretty serious COVID lockdown. And so kind of they were pushed back. But I think what we should definitely anticipate is there is going to be a surge. There absolutely is going to be a surge because the word has already been put out in Central America. Biden is going to drastically reform U.S. immigration law. He's going to expand amnesty. He's going to expand the refugee cap from Trump's 18,000 to about 125,000, right? That's even higher than the unprecedented number that when Obama left office. And so again, when people see that there is now going to be this lack of respect for the U.S.'s immigration law, people will capitalize upon that, right?
And so how much of the delay do you think, or how much rather of this, the current circumstance, because there has been very suppressed numbers for this year for illegal crossings overall, clearly COVID has played a major role. Are expectations then that as COVID numbers drop, and they will be dropping in the U.S. because of the vaccine, it's just a matter of time, assumptions are that they'll be dropping in Mexico, maybe not as quickly, but as well. Once those COVID restrictions come down, will there be essentially a flood of pent-up illegal immigration effectively?
I mean, COVID restrictions in Mexico are essentially non-existent, and the COVID numbers in Mexico are going to rise. But in Central America, I think once you start seeing the COVID restrictions lifting, you are going to see a rise. But even if the Central American restrictions are not lifted, there will undoubtedly be a rise. I think we're not going to see the masses in the 5,000 to 7,000s in terms of the caravans move at a time. There will still be, I think, a significant flow that will undoubtedly overwhelm our border. Absolutely.
Anna Rosa.
And I think it will pose a health risk for sure.
Anna Rosa, thank you so much for joining us. Always good to see you. We'll be talking to you about this in the new year.
Great to see you too. Take care.
More coming up on the immigration battle right after the break. Most Americans tend to forget that our southern border has been plagued with record levels of violence, human trafficking, and many other forms of criminality for years. It was truly the Wild West. It was anarchic and unsafe. But much of that changed for the better part of Donald Trump's presidency. For the first time in decades, real effort was put to securing the southern border, reducing illegal migration, and fighting back against drug cartels and human smugglers. To give us an update on what's actually going on right now at this point at our southern border, and also we can look at what the future may hold for our nation's border security. Happy to welcome onto the program the Deputy Press Secretary for Customs and Border Protection, Jacqueline Thomas. Jacqueline, thanks so much.
Buck, thanks for having me.
Let's start with where we are right now with a question I'm sure you get a lot. What is, at this point, the report card on building a wall, structures down there, fencing, new fencing, all of that? Tell us where we stand.
This administration is on track to complete their goal of 450 physical barrier and border wall system that President Trump started as a goal at the beginning of his administration. That being said, with a new administration coming in, there are threats to stop construction on the wall as well as tear down the physical border that has already been created. Since early October, we have seen a huge migration flex of migrants coming from Mexico and countries further down to South America trying to cross the border because of a new administration's possible incentivizations about what could happen and what a new president would give them.
Now, what does that mean for U.S. relations, specifically with Mexico? They have to transit Mexico to obviously get into the United States on foot. We're talking about the southern borders. So do we expect that there are going to be a whole new slew of policies under a Biden administration, specifically with how we ask our Mexican partners and the Mexican government to handle this expected influx of migrants?
You are absolutely right, Buck. In order to get control specifically of our southern borders, the U.S. has had to have a very specific relationship with Mexico. And our regional partners have been great in specifically MPP, the Migrant Protection Plan, also commonly known as the Remain in Mexico policy. If a new administration were to come into play, they would completely reverse all those policies, and Mexico essentially would have no control with the waves of caravans that would traipse through their country to our southern border.
What can you tell us about an increase in apprehensions of illegal aliens? We've been looking at caravans, and they're on the move, but no major caravans that we've seen, at least in the news, have yet arrived. Is there just an overall spike? And given that this is a time of COVID, we know there are a lot of restrictions in place on movement, and also people have concerns about movement. But have we already seen an increase of illegal aliens apprehended at our southern border? Are we expecting there will be more in the months ahead?
Yes, just this month alone, we saw a number of over 70,000 apprehensions. But that's apprehensions. That isn't including the individuals that got away. We don't have that exact data yet, but we're expecting for the month of December to see over 100,000, with the number increasing into the growing months.
And I mean, what do we have some sense of what the increase looks like? I mean, if you're telling me 100,000 might be the full month toll, is that abnormally high, say, compared even to pre-pandemic years?
Yes. So just according to November of 2019, 1 year ago, we are seeing an increase of over 4%. And one thing that is especially is the increase that we've seen with the underage children. Border Patrol does a very good job at making sure that individuals under the age of 18, whether they are coming here illegally, whether they're with a family, whether they have the unfortunate circumstance of crossing the border through a smuggler, the U.S. is very good about making sure that we're taking care of those young individuals, and also precautions are being taken in place in connection with the other immigration agencies to make sure that we are ready and prepared to take care of these younger children.
We've seen that the preliminary numbers for drug overdoses in the United States are likely to be an all-time high for 2020, over 80,000. Jacqueline, a lot of that comes from cartel smuggling across the southern border. A lot of the opioids, whether synthetic or also just heroin, comes across that border along with other drugs. What are we seeing in terms of cartel activity? Has it been down during the COVID pandemic, or are they using this when people are distracted as an opportunity to try to transit even more illegal narcotics across the border?
What you just said was exactly right. Even with the implementation of Title 42, which was an executive order also implemented by the CDC, which gave the authority to Border Patrol to expel and deport immigrants that cross the border within a time frame of less than 2 hours so that we wouldn't spread coronavirus, even though that in the initial days of 2020 slowed the illegal immigration, the smugglers and the cartels have absolutely taken advantage of everything that's happening politically in our country right now to continue to increase their human smuggling and also their drugs. And it is a fact, Buck, that the majority of the drugs that reach every city in America comes from our southern border. Our Commissioner Mark Morgan says that every city in America is a border city, especially when it comes to drugs.
Are seizures of narcotics overall up? Can you give us some sense of where those numbers are as we go into the new year?
The seizures overall, sadly, are up, and they're with the border wall system, even with the new technology that's taken place, even with the CDC regulations, and with this unprecedented pandemic that is still happening. The drugs and the smugglers keep coming. They're just finding more ways, they're getting more creative, and they're taking advantage of all the loopholes in the system. And mark my words, like our commissioner has said, if a new administration comes into place and does everything that they are claiming to, with opening our borders, with turning CBP into more of a catch and release, and this isn't a policy on our end, these are facts that a new administration has publicly said, you are going to see a immigration crisis that pales in comparison to what we saw over the last 2 years.
Jacqueline Thomas at CBP, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Buck.
We're just weeks away from the Senate runoff in Georgia, two races upon which the balance of power in the U.S. government hinges, at least on the Senate side. After the break, we'll take a look at how immigration could impact the outcome in the Peach State. Stay right there. Georgia's just weeks away from two key runoff elections that will determine control of the U.S. Senate, and immigration will play a role in those results. President-elect Biden won Georgia by only 11,779 votes, and communities of color were key to his win. But as Georgia Democrats are hoping to count on Latino voters who helped tilt this state blue in November, the Senate races are equally tight. Let's bring in someone who's working on the ground in Georgia, D.A. King, founder of the DUSTIN INMAN Society. D.A., thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful.
So how does immigration factor into what will be two of the most important Senate races in recent memory?
Immigration, especially illegal immigration, is a huge issue here in Georgia. Not many people around the country, from our experience, realize that Georgia is home to more illegal aliens than green card holders. DHS says we rank number 7 in the nation of states with an illegal population. We have more illegal aliens than green card holders and more than Arizona. So a lot of conservative voters consider it a huge issue, if not the issue. And we're hopeful that our Republican candidates in the runoff will expand their discussion on the topic.
Now, just to clarify, you're talking about illegal aliens in the state of Georgia. It's not legal for them to vote. Are you just concerned that they are voting, or that the illegal population in Georgia, because of family and kinship ties, is pushing the vote more Democratic because people are going to want to vote for whichever party is more favorable to the status of illegals?
Well, yes, but I was trying to illustrate why it is such an important issue. But if you extrapolate from what I just said, we just had elections in my home county here in Metro Atlanta, in Cobb County, and in Gwinnett County. In Gwinnett County, across the Metro Atlanta area, nearly 8% of that population is illegal. What we have learned when these sheriffs who were doing 287G were defeated is that many of the votes came from first-time young voters recruited by the corporate-funded illegal alien lobby. And we have proven here in Georgia that children who are U.S.-born to illegal aliens do not vote for conservative pro-enforcement candidates. So we're very worried about how the radicalized lawful voters are going to vote.
And what could be done? I mean, one of the big issues, one of the big focuses going into these Georgia runoffs has to do with trying to ensure election integrity. And they're just based on the polling, you can see a lot of people do not feel like there was enough election integrity on November 3rd. So what can be done, or let me start with this, is enough being done in Georgia, and what should be done?
I don't want to speak outside my area of expertise. I'm not an expert on voting, but the way we see it here is that there's not really a question anymore about whether or not there is a huge hole in voting integrity, not only across the nation, but here in Georgia. The question is how big is that hole, and how serious is the lack of integrity? We find that people cast illegal ballots, which is not denied by anybody. We hear stories 2 days after the election that, oh, here's 59 ballots that we found in a drawer. So increasing the integrity of the elections can be done easily with time. I don't know that there'll be any meaningful changes between now and the runoff on January the 5th.
And tell me this, what kind of percentages, just in general, for the Latino vote, and not speaking now about anything having to do with illegal immigrants in the state of Georgia, but the Latino vote in general, is what percentage of the vote in Georgia, and how did Donald Trump do with them on November 3rd? Because Trump obviously did well across the country with Latinos.
The figures that I'm seeing are a point or two above 30%, and I don't know that they're final yet. What we know, I am the proud president of a nonprofit called the DUSTIN INMAN Society, and we are pro-enforcement on immigration. Our enemies are corporate-funded lobbyists who are anti-enforcement on immigration. What we have found is that, for example, the Latinos on our board of advisors are very pro-enforcement. Most of the people who come here who immigrate from socialist countries are not likely to vote for Democrats when they say they want radical socialism or unsecured borders or another amnesty. But a lot of immigrants who come from other countries have been persuaded that the Republican Party is somehow their enemy, and we don't know how that will play out in this election. I'm confident that the two Republican candidates will do well. We need a very, very high turnout for conservative pro-enforcement voters, and I'm hopeful that we can get that.
D.A. King, we appreciate your time, sir. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That's it for this special edition of Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high, everyone, and Merry Christmas.